Well, thank you all. I am joined by Marie Owens-Thompson, the SVP for Sustainability and Chief Economist at IATA, Jarrett John Schaefer, the General Manager from EnergyVille, and Philip McNaughton, the Head of Decarbonization from British Sugar, to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the energy transition. So, first of all, I want to address the perception that sectors like aviation and food processing are really hard to abate. Marie, is that true?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to say that it's true because we can't just electrify and fly like we can solve it with cars, right? We need a different kind of fuel to be able to fly sustainably. But we know how to make that fuel, and we just need to ramp it up. So yeah, hard to abate in the near term, but entirely possible in the slightly longer term.
Philip, what would your perception of that be?
So I think I'll break that down into probably three areas. As a major agri-food company and processor in the UK, I think you've got to think about it from a supply chain perspective. So the front end of that supply chain and the agricultural decarbonisation is certainly challenging. I think agriculture has enough challenges of its own, and decarbonisation or sustainability will be one of those. I think from a scope 1 emissions, if you like, from a decarbonisation point of view, but also the sustainability aspects, so what we do from an operating sites perspective, I think that's further ahead, but I think then it comes down to the third point in terms of where you're located. So we operate 4 dispersed sites on the eastern side of the UK. They're a long way from any of the Track 1 and Track 2 clusters, and so it then comes down to infrastructure and the ability to perhaps develop lower carbon, greener technologies that are off-grid.
And Jarrett, when you're looking across the wider set of sectors and industries that are going through a decarbonization process, how do these two specific industries match up generally? Where do you see potential areas for progress, maybe potential competitive advantages? Where are you seeing them lag?
Yeah, so we don't know too much about, we are an energy research and innovation organization, so agriculture is not directly in our view, but what we see at the longer term is, for instance, the power to proteins movement. So, in fact, from an energy point of view, what you have on your plate is also energy. And finally, it comes from the sun. And now the efficiency to get from the solar energy to your steak is very, very low. It's far below 1%. And there are technologies producing first hydrogen and methanol, and then with precision fermentation and making the meat, the steak, in the same way, when you only need probably 1/10 of the land and 1/10 of the energy. So in the longer term, that might be a big disruption in that area. But I mean, it's still to be researched, and that's for the longer term. And there'll be a disruption of many communities, because then you don't need a cow anymore to make steak. So that's one, let's say, perspective on it. If you look at aviation, we have to see what short-haul flights can maybe electrified, because if you can electrify it, then often it's far more efficient than all the other pathways, and I will explain later why that is important. If not, you go to the very inefficient way of looking for a drop-in fuel, I think, and then you get to synthetic kerosene, for which we need a lot of hydrogen for. And if you use it for that applications, then better not use it for lots of other applications. So that's more or less how I see it in the overall picture. Yeah.
Yeah. So following the good, the bad, and the ugly, let's start with the good. Where have you seen successes in aviation specifically? I mean, you mentioned that we now have the ability to use sustainable aviation fuel, but what other successes are you seeing? What do you feel good about?
Well, I mean, I think I feel good about the fact that there is a solution, you know, and the solution is to the change of the energy source. There is an alternative to fossil fuel, right? We all agree there is an alternative to fossil fuel. There is no alternative to airplanes today. So I would, I don't know, I'm not really answering your question. I'm more like saying what I really have on my mind, which is that we have to fly Yeah, flying is necessary for economic development, not on its own sufficient, but absolutely necessary. So if we must fly, then we must fly sustainably. And the good news is that there are alternatives, but today not in sufficient quantities to make that happen. So I would like the world to unite in one singular conviction that we must fly and we must fly sustainably. And then the policies and the actions and the investments are automatically channeled in the right direction. And for some inexplicable reason, this is not the case today.
The bad and the ugly, they're coming, I promise. So, Philip, for you, where do you really feel that the good has been found? What is the good for where you're sitting?
As a continuation from Marie's point, I absolutely agree that it's good to see there's alternatives developing, cleaner fuels. That technology has moved on leaps and bounds over recent years. We'll touch on the other bits in a minute, I'm sure. I think the bigger point for me around this is, and it's not been discussed in too many of the sessions today so far, is around energy efficiency and energy reduction. So fundamentally, one of my beliefs is that we waste an awful lot of energy across the globe. And actually, if we could reduce the amount of waste and utilise some of that waste energy that's going into other streams that aren't used for anything or going into atmosphere, that would actually make our decarbonisation challenge a whole lot easier. I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that's embraced that over the last 4 decades and more than halved our energy reduction per tonne of sugar. And we've continued that investment over the last 27 years that I've worked for the business and in recent times, including this year as well. So I think I would focus on energy reduction whilst the other technologies continues to develop and we get greater availability of cleaner fuel options.
I feel like I have a panel today that's actually much more focused on what we haven't done than celebrating their successes. It's a first. That's wonderful. Jared, can you talk more generally then about some of the progress that has been made and the data and the evidence that we have to back up that we've made progress?
Let's start with some data first.
We love data. Let's go.
So we are with 8 billion people right now, and probably we will end up with between 10 and 11. Because there are not so many children, extra children every year. There are lots more adults every year because we live longer and we have less and less children. So even overall, it's about 2.3 children per woman. So close to the 2.1 because that's, let's say, the equilibrium. And why is that? Because more and more countries become wealthier, have more access to healthcare and things like that. So we need to let's say, to stabilize world population, we need to get wealthier in more parts of the world, meaning we need more energy. If you look at the 600 exajoule we use today, there are scenarios that we go to 900 or even higher in 2050. There are also scenarios that you stay more or less in the same place as today. Why is that? Because we waste lots of energy right now. So you have to look at the energy efficient pathways. Give me an example. One example on the production side, one example on the consumption side. On the production side, if you look at, for instance, electricity production, if you look at the primary energy put, there's more nuclear than hydro. Because we count the heat from the radioactive rods that goes into the system. But there is more output in kilowatt hours in hydro than from nuclear. So switching to, and it counts for hydro in the statistics, for wind, for solar. So switching from coal to, for instance, solar, already for this kilowatt hour, in the statistics, we reduce about 2/3. So that's one of the things to change to renewable electricity. That's one.
Let me ask you a question there. Have we actually seen any countries, any industries that have successfully started to make that transition?
Yes, you see, for instance, in all of the places, in China, last year, more solar panels have been installed in China than in the whole world the year before. So it's really going to take off. The bad news is it's still last year we had again a record emission of CO2, so it's not going fast enough. If we look at the consumption side, compare an electric vehicle to a diesel vehicle. I drive a vehicle for about electric vehicle for 5 years now. It's about 6 kilometers I get out of a kilowatt hour. What does that mean? Well, the energy content of a liter of diesel is 10 kilowatt hours. It's like running an engine that runs from 1 to 60. And 1 liter for 60 kilometers. So it's far more efficient. So you need 2 or 3, and also if you look at hydrogen, it has the same inefficiency parallel. So choose for the efficient pathways. And if you do that, you probably can stay at 600 exajoule for all the people. And also, of course, for heatings, use waste heat. And I think that's very important, and use heat pumps. And don't use hydrogen for that. And we have seen that heat pump sales are going up, although the year before it was even more because of the energy crisis, but in general there's an upward trend, and solar and wind is also coming up. So there is some good news, but it doesn't go fast enough yet.
So you've actually started to talk about the next part of this, which is trying to understand within aviation. You've talked about, we have a solution, we're not doing it quickly enough. What is actually preventing us from doing it quickly enough? Why are we not transitioning more quickly?
I think I'm an economist, yeah, so I'm going to give you the answer that it's too easy to make lots of money in fossil fuels. Yeah.
Okay, so then my question that comes off the back of that, fair enough, I won't argue with that. My question that comes off the back of that then is, how do you prevent that? So what is the solution to the economic, I don't know, how do we want to express this? The economic kind of drivers behind why we're not moving quickly.
Yeah, it's the poor investment proposition, I would perhaps call it, if I can volunteer a term for what you might have been looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the investment proposition is really poor in renewable energies compared to fossil fuels. And it was starting to change, a bit before the war in Ukraine broke out, because the US was starting to limit exploration of new oil and gas sites on federal land. And, a little bit here and there, governments were starting to put limits on what oil companies could do. And then obviously war broke out, and now the world is drilling more oil, pumping more oil than ever before. And also, of course, the governments are subsidizing this more than ever before, in spite of there having been so many COPs and so many promises that they will phase out these harmful subsidies. So it's a bit of a mind bender, right? That we obviously adhere to the mission that we shall fly sustainably, and we accept that governments impose demands on us to do so, obligations that airlines have to fulfill. But it's sort of mind-blowing that at the same time the whole sector is skewed in favor of the fossil fuel production. So first of all, I would love it to be sort of a level playing field. Another big thing in economics, we like level playing fields, first of all. And then, of course, if we are trying to influence this in a new direction, then it would be good if we could also give the renewables a little bit extra help. And in our sector in particular, it's interesting that the wind and solar sectors were obviously created from nowhere, so to speak, and the governments subsidized them quite significantly. And here we are, with wind and solar being supremely cheap and accessible to everybody. And it's a mystery to me why the world seemingly is unwilling to do that for our industry, given that our industry is so important in terms of generating economic development for everybody, rich and poor.
So then there's one perspective that perhaps there needs to be a governmental push around developing a set of sustainable fuels that might actually allow the aviation sector to move forward. On the food side, Philip, what's your biggest hurdle, and what do you need to change?
I'll probably answer in 3 bits again. So
love threes.
Yeah. Do my best. Energy security, again, follow on from where you really here. I think energy security is one of our biggest concerns moving forward, and that's both the security in supply of the energy that we need to operate our sites, but also the cost associated with that. And the Ukraine war has, I think, changed people's thinking, and security has again become more important and starting to move along a decarbonisation trajectory. Hopefully that will start to change in the not too distant future. And then I'd probably pick on commercialisation, and I mean commercialisation not only of lower carbon solutions, and there being, for want of a better description, a good business case to invest, because like all good industrial operators who like to make a little bit of profit now and again, we do need to have a positive investment case to move down the decarbonisation roadmap as well. But also from a supply chain perspective, what's the drive? Our customers is the person on the street demanding decarbonised products, decarbonised food ingredients. And today, not particularly. The supermarkets and some of the primary retailers are pushing in that direction. So we need to get that a little bit more joined up as well. And then thirdly, I'd probably go to skills. And in some of the other sessions it has talked about skills and skills development. We are massively short globally, but also particularly in the UK, around developing the next scientists, the next engineers who are prepared to take some of the challenges on going forward and to think a bit differently to probably the likes of me who have been around doing it for a while. So I think those would be my three main areas.
So now let's think more kind of action oriented. Where do we start? If you're saying that we have a large variety of roadblocks in hard to abate sectors, they stem from everything from government not paying attention to we don't actually have the people to do this. Where do we go first if we're trying to solve this?
Well, first of all, I think it's good to have a kind of common picture about where we are going to, and then we also come to the aviation part. So if you want to have these energy efficient value chains, we have to continue with what we do already, and that's upscaling the renewables. It goes in an exponential rate, so that's good. And then electrify where you can electrify, and using waste heat where you can use waste heat. And then you get to a few challenges. One of them is this massive upscaling requires lots of skills, lots of materials, and so forth and so on. And the other one is that because you are using renewables, intermittent renewables, we have to deal with intermittency. We had some sessions about it already today. And finally, it's going to be very close to the people. So people should not be seen as, let's say, persons that have only to accept what we're doing, but we should engage them. So they should co-design how things are going to look in the neighborhood. So for me, and with the kind of electrification, this massive upscaling is also, of course, about the grids. Today, only 20% of the energy is used in the form of electricity. All the scenarios that we see are going to high, like 50, 60, 70%. So even you do it very smartly, you still need more copper. You still need more cables and more aluminum. So no grids, no party, we say. If there are no grids, we cannot have an energy transition. We also say, if you have no flexibility, you have no future. So for all the industrial processes, look at how you can be flexible, because otherwise you will not be able to compete. And finally, there is no energy transition if it's not a just energy transition.
So let's keep in the spirit of threes here. I want each of you to give me your 3-point plan for what needs to happen today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now to be able to actually complete a just full energy transition in your sector.
Well, I think I've already mentioned sort of the level playing field and making the investment proposition more attractive for renewable energies. That's
2 points.
I'm counting them as one.
Oh, 1 point.
Yeah. Then we also need a bunch of sort of practical infrastructure around this market so that we can make sure that airlines actually can use the SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel purchases that they make against their decarbonization obligations. We face tons of obligations, and we face obligations for which the necessary product is not available. Yeah, so this is an interesting situation, and it also applies to offsets and carbon credits. Yeah, we face an international obligation regarding that side of the equation, and these credits are also not available because the governments are not releasing them because they need them for their own obligations. So this is again fascinating how we can be obliged to do things for which the solution is not available. Yeah. So we need the infrastructure that allows all of those obligations to be met in a good way, and then. Maybe my number 3 then would be, harmonized regulation. I'm sorry, this is perhaps not the sexiest of things to advocate for, but we are a global industry, and I cannot tell you how important it is that we have harmonized regulation. So, if you're flying across multiple jurisdictions, just to speak about food and food waste and single-use plastic and all of these things, every country has its own specific regulations around these things. And basically airlines have to choose which regulation to violate. Yeah, because it's not possible, right, to fly to all of these places in sequence and respect them all. So this is also a unique challenge to this uniquely global industry that we are, that puts a little bit of a highlight on the necessity for the level playing field and harmonized regulation.
I like breaking the rules, so I'm here for the airlines. Now, what would you say? 3-point plan. You like threes, so.
Well, I'll try to, yeah. The first one I'll go for is stable and consistent government policy. So I absolutely agree with that, and we can chuck regulation on the end of that, so that's kind of 2 in 1. Be great if we hadn't done Brexit, in my opinion. That would have enabled a much stable and consistent EU and UK policy, but there you go. Am I allowed to say that? The second point.
I mean, it's an Economist event. The Economist was very anti-Brexit. You won't get kicked off my stage.
The second point would be about regulation, infrastructure. And I think with that comes energy markets. I think energy markets will continue to develop and will require a lot more flexibility. But to enable that to happen, we're going to have to put the infrastructure in place to allow that to happen. And thirdly, it's just simple, it's increased deployment of cleaner fuels. And within that, I do mean electrification, hydrogen has its place, small modular reactors and others. I haven't mentioned everything, but in order to deliver it, we need increased deployment.
All right, your
I'm
turn.
already over time, I see, so I...
No, it's all right. They took off 5 minutes to keep us on schedule.
In fact,
We're
it's
fine.
simple. We have to accelerate the good. So putting all those wind turbines and those solar panels and to electrify transport and electrify heating, things like that. We have to address, of course, the bad. So all those challenges that are there, the material challenges, the grid challenges, the skills challenges, all that is there. And probably we have to stop with the ugly. And with the ugly is, just an example, you need lots of hydrogen because you want to have your fuels. Don't put it in cars, don't put it in houses, because we have far better alternatives there. And just stop with the ugly.
Good job. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.